The head of the U.S. Army is in the United Arab Emirates for talks with a Russian delegation about the war in Ukraine. A spokesperson for Secretary Dan Driscoll tells MS Now that the talks are going well and that the team does remain optimistic. And a U.S. official tells MS Now there are discussions about a possible meeting between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky in the U.S. by the end of this month. Joining us, Washington Post foreign affairs columnist and MS Now contributor David Ignatius. David, it's November 25th, so there's a holiday tomorrow and then only a few days left. What's the likelihood that Zelensky and Trump meet before December?
So what I know is that the Ukrainian side is trying to get ready for this very quick meeting. It have to happen by early next week if it happens. The striking thing is that we've gone from what was, as of Friday of last week, a very pro-Kremlin document to one that the Ukrainians say is now close to a common understanding about the basics, that President Trump says is very close to a deal. So the idea of a meeting with Zelensky does now seem possible. I think the real issue is, what are the Russians going to say in response? If there's a draft that the Ukrainians are comfortable with, it's almost certain that that's a draft that the Russians are likely to reject. And then what happens? That's the real issue we should be focusing on now, I think.
Yeah. So in order for the Ukrainians to get on board with this, and I will note that President Zelensky last night, after saying that agreeing to this deal would mean, agreeing to lose the dignity of Ukraine or lose the United States. Last night, he softened his language and said there have been changes that make the deal look more optimistic. If one of those changes is NATO membership, not completely Xing out NATO membership for the future, would the Russians ever say yes to that?
So they would want some language limiting that danger. That's been a central demand of theirs. I think what the U.S. is likely to say, pressured by the Europeans, is that NATO's decisions are for NATO. Ukraine is going to resist putting language in its constitution forbidding it from ever joining NATO, which is what the Russians demanded. The reality is that for the foreseeable future, it's unlikely that Ukraine would get NATO membership. That's been understood really for the last few years. So this is the kind of thing you can imagine being bargained out. There are some other issues that I think are probably going to be harder. But the fact that the Trump negotiating team has been able to take a document that Ukraine was stunned by initially and get this in the realm of possibility means that they have moved a good distance. I was told on Saturday, as they were heading for the key talks in Geneva with Ukrainian representatives, that they were prepared to compromise. The initial sense had been this was a take it or leave it from Trump. Turned out it wasn't, that there was more room, more give and take than we thought.
So the president just put out a Truth Social, and I'm going to spring this on you, David, so I apologize. But Steve Witkoff is going to be meeting with Vladimir Putin in Russia, in Moscow, and Driscoll is going to be meeting with the Ukrainians. Again, this is a situation where the U.S. seems to be in the middle of this, but I wonder how much authority we have when the Europeans are really the ones that are arming the Ukrainians right now. We're giving arms to the Europeans, and the Europeans are giving arms to the Ukrainians. Without a seat at the table for the UK, France, other NATO members, how much of this can actually get done?
So I think the reality is that this is a deal that will be brokered by the United States. The Europeans have been in close consultation, especially in the last 3 or 4 days, but they were in the loop going back 3 weeks. I think the key thing that I've heard from people close to the administration negotiating team is that there is a 100% commitment from the U.S. to continue to supply U.S. intelligence to the Ukrainians indefinitely. I mean, that's the key. The weapons the U.S. will sell to Europe, Europe will give to Ukraine. It's a European issue, but they're not really asking for a whole lot more now. What they worry about, what they can't supply, is the intelligence. And if there's a commitment from the U.S. to keep that going, that's probably the critical factor for Ukrainian security.
Is Donald Trump actually willing to make that commitment? Because he has been all over the place on the subject of Ukraine, all over the place on the subject of Vladimir Putin in just the past 6 months.
So we all know he changes from day to day, week to week. On this issue, I was told by somebody who's absolutely joined at the hip with Trump that the commitment was 100% on maintaining the intelligence flow. Could that change? Of course it could. For the moment, the issue Trump is facing, because he's getting agreement from Ukraine apparently on many of the issues that were in the plan. They've narrow the list from 28 to 19, but there still is a lot of Ukrainian give. The issue is what the Russians are willing to agree to. They think they're winning. Vladimir Putin is less interested in peace than victory, and that's the problem that Trump has got to deal with.
Does any of this include Volodymyr Zelensky stepping down, holding an election quickly?
So one of the initial parts of the U.S. plan was a call for elections within 100 days after the agreement was ratified. And that wasn't a crazy argument in the sense that the Russians, but really everybody would like to know that the Ukrainian people are on board supportive of this deal. And an election would be a way to measure that. It would either amount to ratification or rejection. And so I don't know whether that language survives in the current version, but it's not a terrible idea. Zelensky was having real popularity problems, more than I've seen at any time since the war began, before the 28-point plan was launched. And then suddenly, Ukrainians have rallied around him because they think he's being beaten up by the U.S. So he's probably more popular now than he was a month ago. Popular enough to survive? We'll have to see.
All right. David Ignatius, always really good to have you. Thank you so much.